Welcome to the Actually I Can Female Entrepreneur podcast. I am your host, Kayleigh Greenacre, a business strategist, coach, TEDx speaker, author, and your go-to woman for all things business strategy. I am obsessed with supporting female entrepreneurs to grow unstoppable six and multi-six-figure businesses that they love, giving them the freedom and life that they desire. During this podcast, I'll be sharing with you everything that you need to become a successful female entrepreneur, from the mindset shifts to sales and marketing strategies, and how to become an iconic leader that people can't get enough of. It is my mission to help you stand out, attract your dream clients and customers, and sell out of your offers with ease whilst building the business and life of your dreams. Let's make this your reality, ladies. Hello, ladies, and welcome to another episode of Actually I Can, the Female Entrepreneur podcast. And I'm joined today by the fabulous Jade Zammit, who is a sleep consultant. And we are going to be diving into how you can manage and continue to grow your business when sleep deprived. Jade, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here on the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
And I'm really excited about this topic. I think that this is a topic that we've never dived into on the podcast before, and actually something that a lot of people are going to be very interested about, and how we can manage this whole concept of being sleep deprived. But before we dive into that, I would love for you to share with our listeners a little bit more about your journey and your story. So could you give yourself a bit of an introduction and tell us a little bit more about your own journey?
Of course. So I'm a mum of two kids who at the time of this are 8 and 4. So when my eldest first came along, that's, I think, when the fascination in baby sleep and the psychology around it really started. So he was very time sensitive. I read all the baby sleep books, and I've managed to find a way that worked for him. We muddled through the usual ups and downs, I think, over the first couple of years, but the toddler years in particular were extremely hard, extremely hard. He really thrives on connection, but he's very easily stimulated, and I didn't really know how to support him. And so we got through that phase, and my youngest came along, and by that point I thought, okay, we've got this. This is our second child. We know what we're doing this time. Sleep's not going to be a problem. And we were so wrong. So she had severe reflux, and her sleep got us to a point where we were really on our knees. My husband works away, so it's just me and the kids for most of the year. And it felt so isolating. And it felt like that the first time. But I think I was just on autopilot, and I had a lot of other sort of big mindset problems the first time around, whereas this time it was just sheer exhaustion. And I didn't know how to help her. So my husband turned around one day and he said, I think we should hire a professional to help us look into her sleep. And at that point, I was still on maternity leave. And I said, no, actually, I want to be that professional. I want to help others because this is so isolating, it's debilitating, and I can't be the only one struggling in this. And so that's what I did. I researched and I took up training and qualifications with who was at that time the leading sort of sleep specialist in the UK. So I dived in. Again, I was on maternity leave, trying to take in all this information, working through courses. And I handed in my notice and I never went back after that. So I never went back after maternity leave. So that helped me focus on her sleep, really understand the root of what was going on with her sleep. And then I started a business, and I have been helping families ever since. So yes, and that includes a lot of business owners who I get, because we were still, yes, I'd resolved so much of her sleep, but you're working around nap times, bedtimes, how you're building a business around families, and they're going to go through teething, they're going to go through development leaps. Or I even find in myself, when business gets really busy, I struggle to wind down properly at night. And so you're trying to do all the business things and you're shattered at the same time. So yes, that's why I'm here.
Amazing. What a journey as well. And thank you so much for sharing that. So I am so excited to dive into this topic of sleep. And really how we as entrepreneurs can manage having a lack of sleep in order to continue to grow and scale our businesses. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about sleep. Do we need it? I'm assuming the answer is yes. But what impact does a lack of sleep have on our performance as entrepreneurs?
I think that's such a good topic to cover because I think when we're entrepreneurs, we live on, excuse me, autopilot, don't we? You know, we just keep going, we keep going. The tasks come in, the other things need to be done, and that becomes the priority. And often sleep suffers somewhere, whether that's because we're staying up too late at night and we're not properly shutting off ourselves, or is there a root cause in our child's sleep, you know, and it's so disrupted and we don't have that ability to be well rested. So when we do get deep sleep, it restores our brain. Our brain goes through like a detox in the night. So that's why we wake up feeling refreshed in the morning. When we don't, we still feel sluggish because it's not got rid of all those unwanted chemicals that it needs to do in deep sleep. And we don't have the same focus. We can't focus when we are feeling in that state where we're not feeling well rested, which obviously impacts our business. I'm sure everybody can resonate, you know, where you've had a really rubbish night's sleep and you try and do some really important work and your brain is just like, I can't do it. Right. So what also happens when we don't get that lack of sleep is that our brain goes into, you can research this, it's called the chimp paradox, and it goes into like a sort of irrational state. So we don't think in our more human, more rational place. We are much more irrational in our emotions, which in itself is what I see. It brings a lot of parent guilt around because we're snappy, right? And guess who's getting at the neck? It's normally our partners or our kids. You know, we can't control our emotions as well as we can. And that in itself, I think, impacts our sleep because we go to bed at night and go, I wish I wasn't so snappy today, but I'm just so exhausted. And then we don't shut off properly either. And that in itself can be such a spiral. Then there's, I think, the health side of it now. Sleep deprivation impacts everybody, okay? But there are statistics to suggest that it impacts females' more physical health more than it does men's. And that includes things like diabetes increase, you know, heart disease risks. There's so many physical impacts. And I think when we're shattered and you know, I can do it myself. You know, I work in the kitchen. Most entrepreneurs are working from home, right? The snack cupboard's there. We reach for the sugary stuff. We reach for the caffeine. We reach for all the things that actually aren't helping our body, you know, when we're so tired, and then we get the crash. So we're trying to do all the business things, and then we get halfway through the day and we've had all the sugar, the caffeine, and our bodies just crash again, right? So there's that side of it. But I think one of the biggest things for us as business owners is very much around the anxiety and the mental health side that comes from the lack of sleep. When we are sleep deprived, we do become more anxious in ourselves. It brings a lot more sort of depressive, you know, traits in us, and it does. So that impacts our self-belief. We need a concrete self-belief to help build our business, right? So I think that's a huge part of it. And we start getting anxious about things that we're maybe putting out there or people that we're meeting or networking. And we start to get a little bit more introverted when we're so tired, or we make excuses. Oh, do you know, I've had such a rubbish night's sleep. Do I really need to turn up to that event? Do you know, we're not coming into our business with all the energy that we need to give it, or with the doubt that can hinder our progress, I think, is a big one. And the procrastination, you know, the things, I think that's an obvious one, the things don't get done as well.
Absolutely.
So there's lots, I think, that can contribute.
Lots of it impacts us in lots of different ways, doesn't it? And absolutely, I can resonate with so many of the things that you shared there, especially for me, actually, for me as a mum, I was quite lucky with my daughter. She slept like an absolute dream.
Excellent.
And still at the age of 7 now, thankfully. But no, she always did. So I didn't ever have problems from that perspective of being a mum. But as an entrepreneur, building a business whilst being a single mum, whilst working full time, I suffered from that perspective of it. And obviously I put myself through it. But some of the things that you just said there of, again, I think I was always one of those people that knew I had to work. And in order to get the business to work, I had to work in the evenings. I was at
Mhm.
school all day, every day. I had to then work in the evenings in order to do the business. I had to put my child to bed first. So I was working into the early hours pretty much every night,
Mhm.
sleep deprived, turning obviously, like you said, to the caffeine in the morning to kind of get myself going for a 7 a.m. meeting in the head teacher's office. And it was exhausting. It was tiring.
Yeah.
I struggled an awful lot. And I think it's really, really important that some of the things that you said there, that it does negatively impact us in so many different ways. So let's kind of talk about how we can support this and how we can help people, especially when it comes to things such as motivation and focus. Because I think as female entrepreneurs, we're running businesses, but we have to keep that motivation and that focus going, because ultimately the majority of us are running our businesses on our own or with a small team.
Mhm.
If you are listening to this podcast and you have a team of 10 people, then amazing. You have that support mechanism, but you still need that motivation and focus regardless of how big your team is. What can people do to kind of maintain that motivation and focus in their business despite the challenges of sleep deprivation?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because, like I said, even in the beginning of starting up business, we were still going through very much a roller coaster in sleep ourselves. And the biggest thing, I know you've touched on this on other podcasts, but it was the why. The why kept me going, do you know? And that was a huge, huge part of it where I knew I had to find some sort of balance to get to where I needed to be. And that also relied upon calling on a lot of help, do you know, so that we're maybe not working always to the early hours and how we can squeeze in little bits in our day, do you know, time blocking bits. And like you say, it's hard if you are still in work, building a business, and potentially have a family at home as well. I've been in that position. I took up a part-time job in between the last couple of years, and I got to a certain point where I was still running my business alongside and working, and then I collapsed in the shower one day.
Oh
Like,
gosh.
it just, the whole burnout completely got on top of me, and my notice went in that day because I knew I couldn't do it anymore. And I think it's recognizing that burnout part of it. Do you know, we need to build the business, but we need sleep too. And if we want to feel the energy, and I think if you give yourself a couple of days of well rest, you're going to come into your business with a completely different energy and angle and keep that motivation alive. Like it just, it, it makes such a difference, such a difference. So I would do a lot of things even at night because you know what it's like when you've got so many things going on in business, it's hard to shut off because we go to bed and we start thinking about all the things.
We just can't switch off, can we? We're in our heads
No.
and our minds. And I'm sure so many people listening to this episode right now are thinking exactly the same. You go to bed and you think, right, I need to switch off. I need to put my phone down and relax. And then all of a sudden you go, I'm going to send that email tomorrow. Oh, I've got this really good idea for X and I want to do Y by the end of the week. And it's
Yeah,
just crazy.
absolutely. Because and when we actually go to bed, that is the first time probably in our day where we have very little distractions. So actually, there's a lot of scientific evidence to show how much creativity actually comes at that point in the night. So, you know, our brains start to
Yeah.
actually think about these things. I did the same thing myself last night, and I started thinking about a certain post that I wanted to put out there, and I was like, "Oh, that is a really good idea." And I thought I should write that down. And I
Yeah.
thought,
So
no,
don't forget
just go to sleep. But then I woke up this morning, I can remember exactly what it was, and I should have actually just written it down. But we do. And I think brain dumping and trying to get a lot of that out, even before our heads hit the pillow, can
Mm.
just make sure that we're actually fully sort of shutting off before bedtime and getting the rest that we need.
So
Because when
how
that comes, everything else comes.
Absolutely. And how would you advise, or are there any tips that you would give female entrepreneurs that are listening to this who might be struggling to find that balance with their business and getting enough sleep? But I know you've kind of touched on a little bit there in terms of maybe brain dumping and obviously having a couple of days to kind of re-energize, shut off and re-energize. But are there
Mhm.
any other tips specifically for people that are struggling with finding that balance?
Yep. Do you know what? I think we are all very different on when our peak times of the day are, right? Especially if you're working around kids and stuff. Do you know, like yourself, I do a lot of evening work as well. just the way it works in with families and stuff. But actually, my best focus parts of the day are first thing in the morning.
Yes.
So a lot of the early years of building my business, I was always up before the kids, and if that meant I had to go to my bed really early the night before, that worked, you know. So there was no point me slogging on until midnight when I'm not actually working at my best. Whereas actually, I took the early night, got the sleep I needed so that I could actually get up a little bit sharper and do 3 times as much in the morning, and then you start to feel like you've got a much more productive day. Now, I know not everyone's a morning person, okay? That might not be for everybody, and it might be that you need to make some changes to your family's routine to make sure you've got that kind of focus time on your own in the day, but I found that worked a lot. Going back to that sort of brain dumping, it goes, I think, creating your own sort of sleep hygiene, in that routine, getting yourself a consistent bedtime so that you are rested. Again, it's so tempting to stay up, but are you really doing your best work at that point? And for some people, they might do their best work at that time in the evening, So does that mean that you need to allow yourself a bit more time in the morning to make sure you're getting what sleep you need? But what I find works for me, it works for a lot of other business owners that I've spoken to, is getting those lists down and all of those things down before we go to bed. So even if that is in your sort of hour, half hour before bed, and we just lay it all down there, everything's there ready for the next day, so that when you go to bed and you start thinking about all the things that you are going to do, you can kind of remind yourself, actually, I've already put that on paper. I don't need to think about that right now. It is now just time for sleep. Putting the phones away, any of the distractions. I know that myself. If I wake up in the night for the toilet, the first thing I do is I check the time on my phone,
Yeah. Biggest distraction.
Oh, it really, really is. So really simplify, I think, your own sleep habits. Really simplify it.
I love that. And I love what you said there about finding your most productive time of the day as well. And just sort of thinking back to my own experience. I mean, I'm similar to you, most productive in the morning. I could wake up at 5 a.m. and I would be the most energetic soul on this planet, I think, because that's when I work so well. And I think, again, back in my education days, I was in a meeting at 7 a.m. every single morning with the head teacher going, right, what's on the school agenda today? Obviously, it's very different now. I work for myself, female entrepreneur, but I still am the most productive in the mornings, even when Sophia, my daughter's still asleep. And I find it incredible. So I love the idea that you said there about even in the evening, because I can't work in the evenings anymore. I just can't do it. I have to turn the brain off. But I love the idea that you said there about maybe making a list, or if you've got some ideas that are coming to mind, jot them down and then come back to them at your most productive time of the day.
Exactly.
Love that. What a great tip. I'm going to take that on for sure. And I think it's a great opportunity for people to kind of to think about when their most productive time is, but then also using that end of the day, if they're not as productive, using that time to kind of brain dump or put some ideas down potentially so they can come.
Absolutely. And I think even, if there are families who are working around kids. So I worked a lot through nap times, when I first started.
Yes.
So actually, even just brain dumping the night before of what I wanted to do in such a short period of time, if that was a 2-hour nap, if we were lucky, it was knowing exactly what I was going to tackle. You get up, you do the school run, you've got the morning with the little one, and you suddenly get nap time. And you're like, right, what are the most important things I need to do rather than sitting there for 10, 15 minutes and your nap going, what was I going to do again today? Or should I work on this or should I work on that? It's there, and you know exactly what you're doing and your productivity becomes so much better.
Amazing. And I think we as entrepreneurs, but we as humans, we should always prioritize our rest, our sleep, but then also our self-care. And I feel like self-care comes into this quite a lot as well. Would love to know how you personally prioritize your self-care and your rest, even when your business, for example, demands a lot from you, whether it's from clients or whether it's from admin side of things. How do you prioritize self-care and rest?
That's a very good question, because sometimes I need to take a bit of a leaf out my own book sometimes. So, like I'd already mentioned, I went through an episode where I was just juggling far too much, and that resulted in, a huge burnout. in that collapse. And that was a huge wake up call for me that I couldn't keep going the way I was going. And I needed to start prioritizing that bit more self care and a bit more boundaries in the way I was working.
Mm.
So, like, with families that I work with, quite often evening calls work for them best, because they might be working in the day, that sort of thing, or they want their partners to be able to be there, not often one working parent, you know, and so I do work evenings, but I need to block out so many evenings a week to make sure I'm not completely snowed under because as much as I love to be busy, I love what I do. I could do it all day, every day, but I need the wind down time. And I've started to recognize now that I've been getting better at it that actually, come a Friday, I am like, actually, I need that night off just to switch off again. And I'm becoming a bit more aware of that because I can just keep going. If I've got the motivation, I will just keep going and going and going. But it's so important. So we came back from our holiday a couple of weeks ago and the traveling, I think everything, once we got home and trying to catch up, I was floored. I wasn't ill, but I was floored and I was just exhausted. And I took a bath at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Instead of working right through to almost dinner time, I
Yeah.
actually took myself in a bath at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and thought, actually, this is better use of my time just now, just to actually rest. And I felt so much better just taking an hour to really chill out that I managed to tackle all my calls that night in a much better state. So I think it's really recognizing when you need it and just taking it because we can't do the best in our business if we're running on empty.
Exactly. Exactly that. Absolutely. And in regards to your role and your expertise, of course, in sleep,
Yes.
how has that, or how have you managed your own sleep deprivation, I suppose, whilst growing your business? Because you've obviously touched on at the beginning of this episode your journey as a mum. But how have you kind of utilized your role and your expertise, and how have you managed your own sleep deprivation whilst growing?
That's a really good question. So, like I said, when I first started business, so I mean, my youngest was under one at that point. So, you are very much going through a lot of the roller coaster sides of it. So, once her sleep got to a much better place, I think that let it become a little bit more manageable because when your little one's sleep is 90% great, you can
Mhm.
handle when the development leaps come, the teething episodes come, and
Yes.
all of these other things. And it becomes more temporary. And when I mean sleep deprivation, it's that exhaustion when you're on your knees. It becomes more temporary. And and I know how important it is still to make sure we are getting that rest. And if that meant an early night and business stuff has to wait to the next day, the early night had to come first, especially if they're poorly. We've been through, oh, bless my youngest. Touch wood, she's in a much better place now, but we had the first couple of years horrific urine infections, sickness episodes. Like she's really been through the mills, bless her. I think everyone in that hospital knows her by name. Um, and that had to come first, I think, because they're the reason why I do this as well. They're part of my why. So the family in those moments have to come first. But and same with our sleep. It had to. And I think it just meant coming back when you're 100% again. So in those moments, I wouldn't take on all the extra clients that I knew I couldn't deliver the 100% service that I like to give, because my
Yeah.
reputation is also a huge thing. So I think there was a lot of balance in that and actually recognizing when things were tough, what you can actually cope with.
Mhm. Mm.
Because when you get to that burnout stage, it's so hard to come back from.
Yeah. About managing that strategically
Yeah.
and really understanding, like you said, your patterns, your energy levels, and prioritizing, like you said, that self-care and rest. Are there any unique approaches or techniques that you've developed for maximizing that productivity and, that potentially you could share with our listeners today to support those that potentially are struggling with sleep?
Time blocking. time blocking is probably the biggest thing that I would use if I was really struggling in sleep, whether that be through the kids or my own being able to shut down, because my sleep quality is worse the busier things get, and I'm sure a lot of other people are probably the same. But time blocking was probably the biggest thing that I would use in that.
Amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And just tackling the things, like you say, when you've got space, energy, and your productivity is just so much better. And I think that has to happen.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think that was probably the biggest things that I would do is, and I think when you're working with families as well, we are running on pockets of time.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
So,
The odd hour here, or you've got 2 hours until they wake up, and there's so many different things to
yeah,
consider, isn't there, in
we're
terms of that?
in pockets of time quite often. So that's one of the biggest things I think I would have used if I was really struggling in sleep.
Mm. Time blocking, absolutely. And we talk about time blocking an awful lot with the work that I do with my clients as well. Just without sleep even in the mix, actually, but time blocking in terms of your own priorities and what to focus on each day and how
Yeah,
to do your lead generation and sales work and all of those things. So it's really interesting that again this comes into that and
yeah.
goes to show how important time blocking can be and how effective it can be as well.
I think
So
the prioritization, sorry, in that too is quite important, because when you do only have pockets of time and you're exhausted, you're going through the mill, that actually it makes you realize what things actually need to be done. Yes, we want to do all the things, but actually, can that wait? You know, and what actually takes the priority? Do you know?
yeah. And it's as simple as sometimes making a list and
Hmm.
having a look and saying, right, what needs to be done today? What needs to be done this week?
Hmm.
What can actually wait until tomorrow, until next week, etc. Because again, as entrepreneurs, I think sometimes we can create our own overwhelm to an extent, can't we? With, oh my goodness, I need to do this and this and this and this, because we're spinning so many different plates. And then if you're throwing sleep deprivation into the mix, or potentially if you're a mum as well and juggling all sorts, it can be really, really challenging.
It can, and I think that's a good point as well. Of we juggle so much of it on our own.
Mm.
And you hear the phrases all the time of it does take a village, but it does. And if you've got support around you, I know not everybody does, but does that mean that you get a couple hours to squeeze in a nap and actually tackle some of the bits that you need to be done, so that you come back with your little one feeling fresher, you've been productive, but actually you've had a bit of rest in there as well. It's not, and this is something I talk about all the time, it's not weak to ask for support, one, when it comes to business or when you are knackered. It's not a sign of weakness. It's recognizing that actually things are really hard just now and I can't keep going on empty. And I just need a little bit of rest to get myself back, not just for business, but I think for your family as well, so that you can be the best entrepreneur, the best parent that you want to be. So it's okay to ask for help.
Absolutely. I completely agree. Asking for help. There is nothing wrong with that. And I think
Mhm.
always, we all as human beings should ask for help for
Mhm.
anything that we're struggling with or potentially need some support with. So absolutely would agree with you.
1,000%.
So what would be your final piece of advice to offer female entrepreneurs that are potentially sleep deprived about finding success and resilience in their business journeys?
I think going back to that, remembering your why in it. I
Mm.
think the why brings the motivation for it, but building the resilience around it as well. And I think that again, going back, we can't run on empty. We will have no business if we're not doing it to our best of our ability. So the
Mm.
sleep becomes just as important, you know, because we're not giving our best work, we're not giving our best energy. And like I said, if we're not prioritizing the sleep side of things, we are coming in a much more negative frame of mind.
Yes.
That flows in the stuff that we're putting out there. We're not coming at the positive place in the energetic field that we need to come with it. So I think to build the business that we want, we need to make sure the rest is coming with. Um, and I think that's absolutely key. And I know it's hard when you're trying to get a business off the ground and you've got a family or, juggling so much, but the rest has to be there, or we're not going to do it in the way that we vision it, right?
Yeah.
And what you find is that it then kind of comes in waves. We don't have that steady motivation or the mindset around our business to keep it going. Will fluctuate. And yes, there is a bit of normality in that, but it means that when we go down, we go really down. If we're exhausted, burning out, we start to hit rock bottom, and that's harder to climb from than if it's a bit more of a slow roller coaster. We're going to have little bumps and dips and highs, but if we get to a point of complete burnout, we can't operate. We can't operate business. So it has to be key. And then that's going to help your success, right?
Absolutely. As they say, don't run before you can walk. And I think that consistency, that doing that a little bit every day, but actually, like you said, prioritizing your rest, your sleep, your self-care whilst you're building a business is the most healthiest way to do it. Absolutely. We do not want burnout. We don't want anyone to suffer or to struggle. That's definitely not what we want. And I really appreciate you coming onto the podcast today, Jade, and sharing your insights, your knowledge, your expertise. I think this is incredible to share with our listeners and to obviously support them, especially if they're struggling with the sleep side of things. But thank you so much. One final question before we finish for today. I ask every single guest this question. What is your word of the year and why?
Okay, so last year I came up with a bit of a campaign because for me, it's not just about, we want really happy babies. Yes, and often our child's sleep impacts our sleep. But it's thriving, becoming exhausted to thriving. And I think that just resonates in so many aspects, whether it's business, family life, finding balance, going from feeling just exhausted and in the thick of it and getting yourself to a place where you feel fully thriving in, like I say, business life, everything. So that's my word of the year.
Love this. I always love asking people this question. It's so fascinating to find out what people's word of the year. But thank you so much for sharing that. Jade, where can our listeners find you and connect with you?
So you will find me on my website. So I don't know if Kayleigh, you've got the link to that, but that is beyondthestars.co.uk. You'll get access to my socials on Facebook at Jade Sleep Nanny and on Instagram. And I have a lovely community hub that you can come and join me on. You will find everything you need on that website and my free guide as well.
Amazing. Go and give Jade a follow or connect with her. She's absolutely incredible at what she does. And Jade, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on today's podcast.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you so much to everyone that's tuned in to today's episode. Please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. And I'll see you all again next time. Thank you for tuning in to the Actually I Can Female Entrepreneur Podcast with me, your host, Kayleigh Greenacre. If you are ready to build, grow, and scale your dream six-figure or multi-six-figure business, then head to our website now for more information or connect with me on socials to see how you can create your dream business and dream life.